Okay, so good evening, everyone. It's always nice to see your faces here. Familiar faces, because the more we're here together, the more we harmonize this environment, the more we connect with one another, and the better it feels to come here because we immerse ourselves within the love that we each have for one another, and it helps to elevate this environment more and more each time that we're here. And we know that we're also accompanied by a large number of friends who are invisible to us, but who also come here to participate in this wonderful moment every Monday with us, and to our benevolent friends who we can't see as well, who have helped us to set this up. So it's always a pleasure to come up here because I know I'm not only talking to you, I'm talking to so many others who perhaps in the future will become us who are here in the physical life, seated here in this audience, so that perhaps we might have a larger English audience in the future as well. But as Elias had said, today we didn't have our gospel moment because unfortunately Greg had some difficulties. So since I'll be talking about the Christ anyway, and there is no better subject to talk about other than the gospel, I figured I'd just do one large gospel moment for all of us, a more in-depth analysis of one of his passages. One of the passages that are not considered a parable, but it is so rich that it should, because within it we find the key to that inner peace that all of us are after in this life and in previous lives and in successive existences, that key that we're always searching for. And for a lot of us, including myself, sometimes the earthly life seems like a desert. And I feel as if sometimes we're all parched, thirsty, to find something that's going to quench that thirst, to find something that's going to sate our appetites so we're no longer hungry. And I'm not talking about food or water itself. I'm talking about something more important than that, something that transcends the immediate hunger that we have for food and the thirst for liquids. And we wander in this desert of life, seeking things that will quench that thirst, that would fill our appetites. But the problem is we seek things outwardly, external things, to bring that to us. We seek thrills, passions, emotions that will help us to gain that brief moment of ecstasy and peace that we seek so much. And what happens is we end up looking down the horizon in this desert and we see an oasis. And we think, if I can only get there to that oasis, I'm going to be able to rest, I'm going to be able to eat, to drink, and find peace. But as we get closer to it, we realize that the oasis is nothing more than an illusion. It is an illusion because we might be able to briefly sate the appetite that we have in that moment of thrill, but eventually we're going to want to have that again and experience that again. So we're going to need to go back and do something else to continuously sate our appetites. And that is something that we need to think about, because it is like drinking from the ocean water. We're going to always be thirsty, and we're going to need larger and larger containers to quench that thirst that we have. And what do we need to do instead of seeking the outward water or food? We need to seek the inner water and food. To realize that we are not here momentarily, well, in this life we are, but that we are spirits, immortal spirits, and thus we need to seek something that transcends this existence. Because if we seek something that's material, it is temporary. It cannot nourish something that is immortal and everlasting. So we're always going to need to continuously seek things if we only focus on that which is of this life, of the now, of the immediate. So we need to seek that other thing that transcends this life, that will nourish the spirit that we are, that living water of the Christ. And this is why the gospel is so important, because in the gospel we find the teachings that we need in order to sate that appetite, to quench our thirsts. Every single passage, every single parable is a small medicinal dose of this water that we need to no longer feel thirsty. So it is this glass of water that's offered to us. When the Christ came and became the verb itself, exemplifying these lessons that we need to learn and put to good use so that we can continuously drink from this glass of water and not feel thirsty anymore, and no longer need to aimlessly wander in this desert of life, looking for the next oasis that might be greater, bigger, or better, because in reality that oasis, once again, is going to be an illusion once we get there. So Christ offers us this beautiful glass of water, which is the gospel. The gospel is rich. It's wealth. It's a treasure beyond means because it does not corrode with time. It never loses its value. As a matter of fact, it only gains value as we put it to use, as we apply it. It is the only investment in the cosmos that is always going to provide a substantial return for every one of us. And that it's the only way that we will find that inner peace, because instead of seeking things outwardly, with this glass of water, with this teaching, we begin to seek things inwardly, which is the essence, the truth of what we need. And so he gives us his energy, his teachings that descend upon this minuscule cup of water, glass of water, that is this medicinal dose that we need that will indeed cure all of our ills. It's a beautiful thing. It is poetic, and it is love because it comes from the divine source. He is just channeling the wonderful lessons, the wonderful laws of the universe. And in the book, O Evangelho de Jesus, em Espírito e Verdade, or the Gospel of Jesus in Spirit and Truth, we find the following passage by Celia Arribas. And she says, "The spirit of the message of Christ has always been completely different than its common interpretation." What's the common interpretation? It's that superficial understanding of the passage, of the message. I read it, okay, how can I apply this immediately to society, to my behavior? How can I use it now? But the interpretation is completely different than that. And that is the problem for most of us and for most of humanity. Instead of seeking deep down the wealth that is in each one of those teachings, we instead only go through the top layers and think that that is all there is. But as we know, as we mature in life as well, as we become adults, we are able to see things clearer and understand things more completely. As we mature as spirits, the same applies. We see things clearer, and we're able to also understand things better. Patience, forgiveness, charity, compassion, in one word, love, because love is everything. It is the cosmic verb. It is the one thing that reigns supreme in the universe. Universal love, without boundaries, unlimited, without prejudices and obstacles imposed by caste, ethnicity, nationality, gender, and age. Here is that shift of paradigm from the outward to the inner, to the inward search, to the inner search for that which we seek. Because as it says here, it does not have boundaries, it is not limited, it has no prejudice, it has no gender, it has no age. It can't. If it's something that comes from God himself, that supreme intelligence, as we know, if it is eternal, it cannot fit into a limited convention or understanding that we may have here on earth. It has to be much greater than that. And that's what this passage exemplifies. The complete giving of man by man. It is giving of ourselves to those who are around us. It is understanding that supreme commandment of loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. It is by loving ourselves first, by finding that inner peace, that we are able to extend that peace outwards and the love outwards. The home is the result of its inhabitant. If the inhabitant is not at peace, the home will not be at peace. If we as a humanity is not at peace, the world will not be at peace. We have to be able to emanate this outwards, but we can only do so by finding it within and reconciling ourselves with that which might seem as an obstacle now, but is actually that which will help us to obtain this goal. The gospel of Christ, in spirit and truth, constantly invites us to an inner elevation, an inner renewal. Again, the inner self, the one self that only matters. None of the outer selves that we have, the masks that we tend to wear in our daily lives. Rather, the true essence, the true face of the self that we are, the spirit, the immortal spirit. And never to the attachments of written expressions and deceiving appearances. So once again, we elevate beyond the immediacy of this world to the transcendental essence of the universe, and we don't attach the material expressions, the written expressions, or the deceiving appearances to any of his teachings. And that's why it's important for us to delve deep into this broad ocean of crystalline water that Christ brought to us, this glass that we can drink from freely. And it's a source that never ends. It is a well that will never go dry. And that's why we find in John 3:5, when Jesus says to Nicodemus, "Very truly I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit." That living water, the truth, the medicinal water that will help us to find that which we seek. And the Spirit, because it is the only thing that matters. Since we all know that matter dies and corrodes and goes away, and the only thing that remains is the Spirit, then this lends truth to what Christ is saying, and obviously it is the only truth. As we know, our human bodies are composed from anywhere from 50 to 65% water. So we need to drink the right water in order to maintain that inner harmony, obviously from a physical perspective, but from a spiritual perspective as well. Because if the spirit is at peace, the body will also be at peace. And then Herculanopides says the following in the same book: Christ would not be the earthly king or a sovereign conqueror dominating in charge of an army. So again, we can't limit him to these conventions. The Israelites, the Jews of the time, thought that they would get a Messiah that would be a warrior and liberate their country and get them the freedom they wanted and to be able to dominate the world with their ideals, their conventions, and their notions. But that's not the truth. He didn't come to liberate armies or countries or empires or people. He's not the savior of this world that we live in. And savior is a religious word. He is a liberator, but not a liberator of things that are material, but a liberator of consciences. He allows us to save ourselves through our conscience by understanding the laws that are written in it, by applying them on our daily activities, through the teachings of the gospel that he bestowed upon us, so that we could have the example through his example as well. But rather a spiritual sovereign, the one who would drive the souls and not the bodies of men, the one who would speak to the spirits and not to the citizens of Rome, Israel, Egypt, or Babylon. He would speak to the spirits, therefore all of humankind, because we are all spirits. And we see throughout the world a little bit of the Christ's teachings everywhere. The golden rule is applied to every religion. The golden rule is this rule that Christ bestowed upon us. So he speaks to the spirit of humanity, the spirit that we all are. And it is about time that we pay heed, that we have the ears to hear this wonderful message, and that we really truly drink from that living water, so that we no longer feel thirsty walking in this desert of life. So how can we find this inner peace? Because we all have problems, obstacles, bumps on the road to get to that flat highway that'll take us to that peace. How do we do that? Well, we can do that through conciliation. What does the dictionary tell us conciliation means? Conciliation means to overcome the distrust or hostility of, placate, win over, to win or gain, goodwill, regard, or favor, to make compatible, to reconcile. The most important one here is to overcome the distrust or hostility of. But it's not just to overcome the distrust and hostility of another. It is to overcome the distrust and hostility of the self, of our own selves. We are our own worst enemies. We are our own adversaries. The things that prevent us from doing that which we want, from drinking from that pure water that will no longer leave us parched, is precisely that which is within us that we do not accept as being something negative that we need to work on. And this is precisely why we need to find that conciliation. Not outwardly, but inwardly. That is the most important part of it. And that's why this passage of reconciliation is so important, because it teaches us exactly how we need to do that. So the passages and the messages from the gospel can be interpreted, as I said, in two separate ways. It can be interpreted superficially, which is only the first layer of the content of that glass of water from the Christ, which is a superficial or broad stroke of the brush, which is the immediate application of that passage on how we ought to do, how we ought to put this into practice with society or with those that need our help. Then we have a deeper interpretation of the passage, which is this transpersonal, psychological interpretation of the self. So this glass of water from the Christ, we can take the first sip, which is the superficial sip of understanding the first layer of the passage. But we need to continue to drink this water, to take more and more sips out of this glass until we get to the very bottom of it, so we can find the true interpretation of the passages, that which is transpersonal, psychological, that which applies to the self. So the passage that we brought today is this passage about reconciliation. And we see in this image here these two little monkeys embracing each other to exemplify that word, the exemplification of reconciliation, reconciling with our brothers. But as we said, that is the superficial aspect of the passage, the broad aspect of it, the first layer. Because we can allude ourselves as an example to being a book. We can compare ourselves to being a book. What we see today is this part, the cover of the book. But within us, there is a large content from past existences, from other lives, that make us rich with a past history beyond our understanding. But right now we only see this. And we need to work on reconciling perhaps all of this that we may have left behind so that we can be at peace. And so this passage is from Matthew 5:25 to 26, and it reads, "Reconcile quickly with your adversary while you are still on the way to court. Otherwise, he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny." So how can we take the broad stroke of the brush in this passage and interpret it superficially? To interpret it only in the external means, the outward way that we can look at this, when it means how we ought to deal with our brother, our sister, instead of us. Reconcile quickly with your adversary while you're still on the way to court. Before we get to that judgment day, which is that discarnation, while we are on the way there with our brother or sister next to us that may have some disagreement, some discord, let us work on reconciling with them, on making peace with them, on making things right. So that otherwise, if we don't do this, otherwise he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. What is this prison? We understand in the Spiritist doctrine that we have successive existences, various incarnations. And if we are not able to reconcile today with our brother and sister, this will carry over. From what I've spoken earlier, we are immortal beings. This is a momentary existence. So our brother and sister who is in disagreement with us, whom we may have caused harm, is going to discarnate. He is going to leave this life. And in doing so, he'll be free. But he will still be attached to us, and we will be attached to him or her because of this disagreement that maintains us bonded to each other and linked because we didn't work on righting whatever wrong we may have done to one another. And thus, from that other realm, from that other side, that other dimension, that friend, that brother or sister will continue to perturb us and will continue to disturb our own betterment, our own improvement, our own ability to learn here. So we have to make things right with them while they're still around, so that we may have a friend on the other side instead of an adversary or, in quote unquote, an enemy that will continue on through many existences. And this part of our lives, this excess here, will continue there weighing us down instead of us working through it and reconciling ourselves with our past. Because maybe we bring with us things from past existences, with brothers that we incarnate together in the same home, that we work together in the same environment, that are those very brothers with whom we have not reconciled yet. And it is incumbent upon us to make things right while we are on the way to court, before we get to that judgment, before we leave here and we haven't worked on that which we were supposed to work on. Because we love to nap. What do we do in this life? We sleep. While we're in this life, it's just easy peasy. Just take a nap. And we awake our conscience too late, because we will be already on the other side. And then it's too late. You can't do anything else anymore. You have to wait for another chance to come back and right that wrong. So truly I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. And the last penny is we need to work on clearing all of that backloading, that excess that we have, that backlog of things that we have done in the past in those relationships. And that's why we find here in chapter 10 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, talking about this very last part of this passage. Thus, when Jesus tells us to reconcile with our enemies as soon as possible, he is not merely concerned with patching up quarrels during our earthly life, which is important as well, but he is also encouraging us to avoid having our quarrels spill over into future lives. As he said, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. That is to say, not until God's justice has been completely satisfied. God's justice has been completely satisfied. God's justice lies beyond the mortality, lies beyond the temporary. God's justice is eternal. It is immortal. So that justice has to be satisfied. In other words, we have to reconcile with our brothers and sisters so that when we leave here, that justice that is immortal is reconciled and it finds itself even, and we no longer need to work on that anymore. We can move on and work on things to continue on this wonderful and incessant evolution of the Spirit. So this is the superficial analysis of the passage, of what we can do outwardly to the brother or sister with whom we have disagreements. But now we have to look at it in the other way, which is the self-analysis, the most important aspect of any passage of the Christ, because all the parables, all the passages can be analyzed outwardly and inwardly, superficially and in depth. For others, or how to apply things to society, and for ourselves, how to apply things within us, how to make that divine essence come to life. So once again, we have the brothers embracing. But what if we have to embrace ourselves? Reconciling with ourselves. How can we reconcile with someone else if we're not reconciled with ourselves? How can we find peace with someone else if we're not at peace with ourselves? How can we be satisfied with someone else and that someone else provide us satisfaction and happiness if we are not satisfied with ourselves and not happy with ourselves? We often say, oh, I'm very patient until he makes me lose my patience. I'm very calm until she makes me lose my tranquility. So are we in control, or is someone else in control of us? Is that other person with a remote control controlling our emotions? Are we really allowing this to be the reality of our lives? Or do we need to reconcile with ourselves and find the peace that we need to find in order to be in control of our emotions and not be affected by the exterior things, and rather only allow the inner things to affect their nature, which is a good thing, because their nature is good, because what's within us is the divine essence. So, reconciling with the self. Did a very bad Photoshop job, but it gets the point across. Yeah, I just copy-pasted the face of the other monkey. Yeah. So we have the passage again. And let's go through it again. Reconcile quickly with your adversary while you're still on the way to the court. Who is the adversary? The inner adversary, the inner enemies. Pride, selfishness, presumptuousness, arrogance, vanity, you name it. All of those things are our own worst enemies. Reconcile with them quickly. Quickly. What does Jesus mean quickly? Why does he mean by that? While you're still on the way to court. While it's manifesting within you. While we are angry. While we are being selfish. While we are being proud. Work on controlling it. Don't let the others with the remote control you. Work on controlling that which is coming from your own self. Dominate the self. If you can't dominate the self, you can't dominate anything else in life. So we have to first control ourselves on the way to the court while it's happening now. Jesus says, do it now. Take advantage of the time we have now. Because you know what? We're going to come back again. No one in their right mind wants to repeat the same grade in school. I know I never did. But that's what happens to all of us. We're in a greater school. We just don't realize it. And we repeat the same grade over and over and over and over again because we fail. We don't pass. So we need to pass. And it's easy to pass as long as we study those inner imperfections. Otherwise, he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer. Who's the judge and the officer? We are the judge and the officer. The conscience is the judge and the officer because the divine laws are written within the conscience. And if it's not in accordance with what we're doing, we may not be aware of it because we're still in that conscientious nap. But the conscience is telling us inadvertently and indirectly that we need to find the right path. We need to overcome those inner enemies. And you may be thrown into prison. What is the prison? It is the prison that we build for our own selves because we limit ourselves in not allowing ourselves to accept that we are still learning beings. We're not perfect yet, far from it. We're perfectible, if that's a word in English. We can become perfect, but we're not there yet. We're very far from it. But we have to accept our nature. We have to accept those enemies, reconciling with them because they're not enemies. They're friends. They're part of us, part of our essence. And what we need to do is take those enemies and make them our buddies, our pals, and work on them to transform them into something good, because that's all that matters. That's why Jesus says, reconcile quickly with your adversary. Reconciling means we find that inner divinity, the God that is within us. Truly I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. What's the last penny? Penny is the smallest denomination of the money here in the United States. It's basically worthless today. Nobody even bothers to go down to pick it up. What does this mean? It's an expert definition. In Portuguese, as we all know, it's ceitil, o último ceitil. Why? It's the smallest thing. Because God doesn't expect us to just completely humble ourselves, accept everything, because he knows we're not there yet. We're imperfect. So he says, just a penny, just a little bit of humility is enough. Recognize it just a little bit, and all of a sudden you're going to be unshackled from that prison, and you'll bail yourself out with that small penny. It's that simple. The people who make it difficult are us because we don't reconcile with our own selves. We're too busy trying to reconcile with outward things, getting outward things, external things, instead of focusing on the inner things that matter. And in the book, Triunfo Pessoal, or Personal Triumph, we find the following passage from Joana de Angelis that says, the reconciliation with the adversary is necessary for inner peace. We've talked about this here. Those morbid, disturbing habits, which I've outlined here, which is the laziness, idleness, pride, etc., transforming them into agents of progress and renewal. It's like the passage, the parable of the wheat and the weed. Allowing the wheat to prosper, letting the weed die out. The wheat is part of the wheat. It's a matter of turning the weed into the wheat and allowing the right thing to prosper. Through which, into agents of progress and renewal, through which balance is installed well-being, health, the kingdom of heaven, and the transitory earth. The kingdom of what is the kingdom of heaven? Where is it? We are the kingdom of heaven. It is within us. It's as simple as that. If we have divinity in us, his essence, that means that we have a kingdom within us, a kingdom of love. And it's only a matter of time before we tap into it, and that dam just comes apart and ruptures, and that love just flows outward. That's what this means. We can find it on earth. We can. If, and only if, we reconcile with our inner enemies and accept our true nature as students of the earthly life, so that we may perhaps graduate to a better state of being in the future. This healthy identification of the values of the self, the perfect integration in it, constitutes one of the Beatitudes, the one that provides to man the earthly happiness. So we can be happy in this world. But why can't we, when we think about it, why can't we be happy in this world? Because we try to get that happiness that's external to us through material means. A better job, a better income, a better house, a better car, sometimes a better wife, a better husband. Whichever way. But that's the problem. We're seeking that oasis that is an illusion instead of drinking from the living water of the Christ that is the only reality. Once we start sipping from that inner water, the living water of the Christ, then we find this happiness. Because it is an earthly happiness as well. Why? Earth is part of the cosmos. The cosmos is created by the Father. So everything that's within the cosmos, everything that's within Earth, everything that's within us is happiness. We are the ones who create unhappiness. Because if we tap into the reality of things, there is no such thing. Unhappiness, sadness does not exist. It's a creation of our own conscience. We allow it to exist because we're weak and imperfect. How is it possible that there are beings who are saints, celestial spirits who live in worlds that are happy, who are way more advanced than us? Why? Because they accepted their role in this great machine of the universe. They're co-creators. Why have they allowed themselves to reach that level? Because they have tapped into that inner love. They recognize that the unhappiness comes from us. The sadness, everything that's bad comes from us. Because we don't know how to turn the energy into something positive. The one that provides to man the earthly happiness, a prelude or a preface of the future spiritual life to which he is destined. Because there is a fatality to all of us. There is one. And that is, we will reach happiness. We will reach this relative perfection, because we cannot be perfect. Only God is perfect. But we can reach this relative perfection to where we're so close to him that it is like Christ. We just emanate his own love because we are a direct medium of the Father. We are a direct channel to him. We are this radio station, radio station that we are just tuned into the right frequency, and we just get these wonderful emanations from his broadcasting tower in the cosmos. That's our goal. That's what we need to do. It's still far ahead, but we can work on it now, like Christ said, while we are going to court. So how can we visualize this in a way that's easy to understand graphically? So I put this together, and I hope that it makes sense, because it took a lot of work to put the animations in order. Anyway, so we have the outer circle. This is obviously not to imply limits, because there are no limits, but this is to imply that we are within God. Paul said, in him we live, in him we exist, in him we move. So we are within God. God is everywhere within us and outside of us. It is only a matter of us having the ears to hear, the eyes to see, and the hearts to feel. So here we have the divine source of unending love that is always around us. We just don't know how to tap into it. It's like we are in an oil company, and we're trying to figure out if there's oil somewhere, and we're doing the geological survey, but we don't have the equipment to get to that well yet, to turn that raw matter into this resource to produce energy. That's basically where we find ourselves. We need to be able to get the equipment working, and we can only do this by reconciling with ourselves, so the machinery can work, and we can finally tap into that well and allow the oil of love to gush outwards. And then within this, we have the self, us, the small sphere within this infinity of unending love and everything else. And then we have the quote-unquote external enemies or adversaries. Let's say here, for sake of example, there are 4 of them, which I think we all have a lot more than 4. And we are all interconnected. Something links us. And what links us? If we're energy, if we are energetic beings, energetic's not the right word, but if we're beings composed of energy, that means that what we emanate, we get back. What we send out, we get back. Whatever frequency we're in is a frequency that we're going to get back. So if we are unhappy with ourselves, and we have this brother or sister whom we may have done wrong in a past life or a past existence, that connection is going to stay there with us, and it's going to be linked to us without us knowing. You know, whenever we're feeling sad, down, downtrodden, unhappy, clearly that's because there's someone there as well causing that sensation in us, because we allowed that frequency to open itself up, that channel, to receive that. So we're constantly linked by this affinity. It's a law of affinity. We can't find the inner happiness, so we're sad. They're sad because they can't find the inner happiness. They're not reconciled with us. We're not reconciled with them. We're not reconciled with ourselves. They're not reconciled with themselves. So we're just linked, bonded together by unhappiness. It's sad, but it is the reality of where we find ourselves in evolution at this moment in time. So what happens? Within us, we have the seeds, the divine seeds, waiting to be watered by the living water of the Christ. But instead, we are allowing them to remain dormant in the soil. So there are the internal adversaries, the enemies. And these are, of course, pride, selfishness, irresponsibility, presumption, etc., vanity, like my mother said. And we try to somehow forget that we have these things. We have an escape. What's the escape? There are 2 escapes for us. First one is guilt, where we blame ourselves for not being good enough, for not having the ability to get to where I need to go. I'm not worthy, because we all are worthy. And we all have the ability to learn and to get there. And what does the blame mean? I'm going to tell you what the blame means as soon as I find the page here. So it's this process of judging the self. The person becomes their own inner judge. Again, the court, the officer. So we begin to condemn ourselves and to punish ourselves, because God doesn't punish anyone. We punish ourselves. If God punished, that would not be in accordance with his divine love and his divine justice. So this self-punishment is a mechanism of this prison without any bars, where we create physical illnesses and emotional illnesses, where we harm ourselves because we're harboring all these negative energies. Because we don't think we are as perfect as we would like to be. That's such a sad thing. Because we are as perfect as we need to be right now. And we can work on becoming better, more perfect. So it is the existential illness of those who do not assume the condition of students of life. That's the guilt, the blame. It's an escape route for us not to accept responsibility. I'm not responsible for my own problems. Why should I reconcile with myself? I am not good enough. I don't have the energy. I don't have the time. I don't have the ability. I have other things to worry about. They want to be masters without going through the learning process that takes someone to become a master. So, what's the second one? Excuses. When we project the problem onto someone else, something else. That's the obstacle over there, not me. I'm not the obstacle. So the excuse also starts in the self-judgment or the inner judgment. The difference from guilt and blame is that the person projects his or her imperfections on others, believing himself to not have any issues, just like the son, the older son from the parable of the 2 sons. Yes. So the person justifies himself projecting the blame on others, and as such, he creates a mask that will also be a prison. because it is a false illusion of the self, where we start to think that we're something that we're not. So this person is full of what? Pride, vanity. I am that good. It isn't me. It's the other person. It's not me. It's her. It's not me. It's my job. It's not me. It's my house. It's not me, etc., etc. So he believes to be living in a 5-star hotel because he or she may think that they are perfect and worthy of all of the blessings in the world. So these are the two escape routes that we have and we often use. Okay, so here's that prison, the inner prison, the judge, the officer, which is the conscience. So what do? We take these undeveloped virtues, reconciling with ourselves, as I've explained in the previous slide, and allow it to become this, because it is a divine seed. If we water it with the living water of the Christ, the flower will blossom, and we will become this divine garden, filled with perfume and all of the right virtues that we need. And then what happens? We recognize those imperfections, and we pay the last penny. We bailed ourselves out of the prison. We unshackled ourselves. The prison is no longer there. It goes away. Now we are free to do the work that we really, truly need to do. Once we recognize our mistakes, our errors, reconcile with ourselves, embrace ourselves, and understand who we truly are, now we can emanate from us that love that's within us. That divine source, the unending love, that is also within us. We are immortal, thus our love is infinite. So we can emanate it. We just need to tap into it. And here we have tapped into it. And what happens? That love that we send out, just like everything else, is going to come back. Cause and effect. I send something out, I'm getting something back, whether it's positive or negative. I'm sending love out, that love is coming back. And that love is now going back to those external adversaries that had not felt this love yet. Because now I love myself. I finally truly love myself. Now I can truly love others. Because if I don't love myself, I cannot love anyone else. So now I can truly love my external adversaries. And in turn, as they're bathed with this blessing, they're no longer able to tap into this negativity that we once had. Because we've built this vibrational energetic shield around us of harmony and love. So their negativity, their sadness, can no longer penetrate us. So they give up. They quit. And they themselves humble themselves and accept their own positions. And as such, we exemplify the Christ and show them through our example how they can also reconcile with themselves and find their own inner love, and thus, so this is the inner transformation, liberation of benevolent energies ours, and thus, they themselves send love back to us. And the full cycle and chain of love is complete. It's a beautiful thing. Does this make sense? Okay, so this is basically what that passage means. In a very simplified way, in a figure, in an image, that's what it means. There's a process. And it might look complicated with all the lines and dots and etc., but it's simple. All it starts with is our own will. An insignificant effort. We just have to want to do it. And then we find that that desert now becomes a lush green pasture because we're no longer thirsty. We're no longer thirsty. We've drunk the whole glass of medicinal water of the Christ. And what did Kardec say, what did the Spirits say in the Spirits book about all of this? In item 1006, the law that governs the duration of suffering is therefore eminently wise and beneficent, because it's God's law. It has to be. It subordinates that duration to the Spirit's own efforts, never depriving it of its free will. So He will never interrupt us. He expects us to know what we need to do. We can swim so far away, but the current's going to bring us back. We can navigate so far away, but the divine breath of the Father is going to push the wind at the back of our sails back to the right route. So we can only go so far. If it makes a bad use of it, it will have to bear the consequences, cause and effect. So it's always us, no one else, no one else. Item 1007. There are spirits who put off their repentance. But supposing that they will never improve would be to deny the law of progress and to assert that the child will never become an adult. So this is insane, to think that there is an eternal punishment. We suffer as long as we want to suffer. It is our nature to suffer if we want to. We don't have to. We don't have to be in pain. We're not here to suffer. This is an absurd notion. We're here to learn. We're here to become better. We're not here to be in pain. We're here to feel good, to make the pain go away. That's what we're here for, and this is what this means. The child will never become an adult if we deny this true law, this universal law of progress. Just like the Spirit. We are spiritual children, but we're going to progress and we're going to become spiritual adults. Item 1008. There are punishments that can be imposed on the spirit for a specific length of time, but God, who wills only the good for God's creatures, always welcomes its repentance. The spirit's desire to improve is never fruitless. If we're willing, God is sure willing. If we want to, the gates are going to open. That narrow door becomes wide. If we're willing, if we want to go through with it. And it's never fruitless, because when it's good, it's great. Because as I said, bad is temporary. That's why we see bad things on earth. They don't last, they go away. Only good is eternal. Let us not fall into the illusion that bad is ever present. There are only bad things in the world today. There are only bad things in my life. There are only good things. Because all those things that seem bad to us because we're limited in our own sight and perspective might be what we just need. It might be the actual thing that's really good for us in the eyes of the Father, in the eyes of the Christ. If we were walking down in a forest, down along a pathway, we don't know what's next. And it might be something bad. There might be a trap that holds us in a specific position and we can't continue. But to the man who is up at top of the mountain and can see the entire path that we're about to walk and sees that beyond that obstacle there was something bad for us, and thus that trap was there for a reason, then that trap that may have caused us pain is actually good for us. So we wouldn't continue to walk on the wrong way, towards the wrong path. Does that make sense? Nobody's nodding, but I'll just assume yes. So item 1009 says, could God make justice obligatory for everyone if they were not given the means to comprehend it? Besides, isn't justice sublime when, allied with goodness, it makes the duration of punishment depend on the efforts of the guilty to improve themselves? So it is our effort. It is our own work. The merit is ours. Therein you will find the truth of the precept, to each according to his deeds. To each according to his deeds. As I said before here in a past talk, we are the architects of our own buildings. We are the artificers of our own future. We build the road that we walk on. So let's make sure we pave a smooth road so we can have a smooth walk. And to finalize, let's see what the book Heaven and Hell, which is a book that's not very often consulted, but it's a great book, and I recommend you all to study it if you have the ability, or not the ability, that's a bad way of putting it, but the opportunity to study it. Everybody has the ability, that's obvious. We find that in chapter 7, item 33 in part 1, when talking about the penal code of suffering, of spiritual suffering, of the spiritual life, Kardec says, suffering is inherent to imperfection. We are imperfect, therefore we suffer, because we need to become perfect. It is that tool that propels us and pushes us forward. Every imperfection, as well as every wrong resulting from it, brings its own punishment, cause and effect, in natural and inevitable consequences. Hence, sickness results from excess. When we eat too much, we get a tummy ache. It's a physical response. And boredom from laziness. If you don't do anything, we're going to be bored. So let's work so we're not bored in this life. Let's wake up from the nap that we're taking and wake our conscience up to the work that's ahead that we need to do, so that we don't only wake up when we leave here when it's too late. Let's reconcile with ourselves now. Pay that last penny now. Without there having to be some kind of special condemnation for each wrong or individual. Since all people can free themselves from their imperfections by their will, they can annul the ills that result from them and can ensure their future happiness. Again, it's all up to us. No one's going to do the work for us. If we don't do a homework on time in school, we're going to suffer the consequences. If we don't turn in a project at work or report on time, we're going to suffer the consequences. Now, they may not be grave, but if we continue to procrastinate and never turn in that homework or never turn in that report, we may fail the grade and we may get fired from the job. So why wait? Why be lazy and bored? Take the time, study the material so you can do the homework, turn in the homework on time, turn in the report on time, so perhaps you can be promoted instead of fired and graduate instead of failing. And then, to each according to his or her deeds, in heaven as well as on earth, such is the law of divine justice. So that is the law of divine justice. The justice is done by us. We are the judge, the jury, the victim, the court, everything. We are a world within. We are a microcosm of infinity within us. So let's work to recognize that and channel that love that's within us and emanate it outwards so we can all love one another and perhaps make ourselves or reconcile ourselves with our own enemies so that we can in the future, or perhaps now, while they're manifesting themselves, reconcile with our brothers and sisters as well. So thank you so much for your attention and for coming here today. And I hope Jesus blesses every one of you in your steps, and may God also bless each and every one of you. Thank you so much.